How was I supposed to know that moment would completely change my life? It was just an ordinary day until I walked into that room. When I saw the door was slightly ajar, something inside me changed within seconds. I could have turned around and ignored it, but I didn't. Because in that moment, when I realized what I was looking at, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. And yes, I was the guilty one here, because I was the one who started it and the one who didn't stop it. George was at work. The house was silent, but I heard vague noises from upstairs. Elliot was in his room. At first, I didn't think much of it, just another moment of a young man lost in his own world. But maybe he'd like a cup of coffee. A little chat would be nice. As I walked up the stairs, I tried to figure out where the sounds were coming from. When I got closer to his room, I saw the door seemed to be a little bit ajar. I was about to call out to him, but then my gaze fell on Elliot. He was sitting on his bed, his laptop on his lap, the bright screen casting a glow on his face. His hands were moving, and at first, I thought he was just watching something exciting, maybe an action movie. But when I took another step, how I changed, the blood drained from my face. That was the moment I realized exactly what Elliot was doing. My eyes caught the reflection on the screen, and a cold wave washed over me. God, I hadn't expected this. I hadn't wanted to see this. He hurried, tried to himself together in a panic, turned down the volume on his laptop, but it was too late. The moment had already happened. When our eyes met, his face flushed red, the shame in his eyes unmistakable. God, I'm sorry, he stammered as he looked away. I froze as I stood there. The door, I started, but I had no idea what I was even trying to say. Then something strange went through me. I was ashamed, yes, but my thoughts were also racing through my head. I couldn't quite process it. I quickly stepped out of the room. My heart pounded against my body. I pressed my hands against my face and tried to calm my... What the hell was that? I whispered to myself. What had I just done? Why had I been so careless? But was I the only guilty one? Stop it, Darlene, I said sternly to myself, but the chaos inside me was caused by more than just what I had seen. Elliot was 23 now. He was no longer a child, but I was also 47, a woman who had experienced her share of shame in life. I had never been in a situation like this, but I knew exactly what shame like. I stood frozen in the hallway. My heart was still pounding. I ran my hand through my hair and tried to myself together. When Elliot appeared in the doorway, he straightened the collar of his shirt, cleared his throat and kept his eyes down. But my eyes weren't on him. They were focused on something else, something big. It caught my eye. I froze for a moment. Seeing him like that caused a storm inside me. I shouldn't have seen it. I should have turned away immediately, but I didn't. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to understand what I was. Then I quickly walked back. There was something inside me I couldn't suppress, but I had to ignore it. I went back to my room, lay down, but nothing was the same anymore. That night, I had no idea how much more complicated things would become. No matter what I did, I couldn't resist the growing connection with Elliot. With each passing day, the boundaries blurred more and more, and the bond between us only grew stronger. I didn't even realize when it had gotten this far, but the only thing I knew was that going back was becoming impossible. And then Elliot came home late. He was drunk. The noise of the door, the things he knocked over. The sounds could have woken George, but I knew how hard it was for him to wake up, so I acted quickly. I stepped out of my room and walked towards Elliot. I didn't even have time to straighten my clothes properly before I was standing right next to him. Elliot's eyes were somewhat glazed and a faint smile played on his face. "Darlene, are you real?" he mumbled, his words slurred by the alcohol but still sincere. I took a deep breath and grabbed his arm. "Elliot, come on, you can't go upstairs like this. We have to be quiet." But Elliot's eyes were fixed on my face. He smiled softly, his gaze slowly drifted over me. "You know, you're really beautiful. Were you always like this? Or did I just never notice?" I froze for a moment, but then quickly recovered. "Elliot, that's enough. Come to the kitchen. I'll make you some coffee." I slowly led him to the kitchen. I tried to sober him up a bit, but Elliot's gaze and the things he said also stirred something inside me. Elliot sat down on the chair while I made the coffee, but suddenly the cup slipped from his hands and fell onto the counter. Elliot, you need to be more careful, I whispered quickly as I tried to clean up the mess, but Elliot just smiled softly. Were you always this sweet? I quickly cleaned up the kitchen. We couldn't stay here any longer. George was upstairs, but with Elliot in this state, we couldn't afford to make any more noise. Okay, we're going upstairs, but be quiet, I warned, putting my arm around his and leading him to the stairs. When we reached his room, his movements were even more unsteady. He needed to change clothes, but he was too out of it to do so. At first I wanted to turn around, but when I saw him struggling to take off his shirt, I instinctively helped him. As my hand reached for the buttons of his shirt, Elliot's movements slowed down. In that moment, the tension between us filled the air. The silence only made it more intense. I knew exactly what I was doing. Yet at the same time, I had no idea. Elliot looked at me differently, and this was one of those moments. One of those moments we could never reverse. Elliot hesitated as he changed. Then he let his hands fall to his sides and looked at me intently. Then I realized my breathing had quickened. It was so quiet, the air in the room so heavy, that it was hard to even. I'm not playing this game anymore, Darlene, he said, softly at first but with certainty. I stared at him without blinking. My heart pounded. But what was Elliot trying to say? You? He added. His voice became slightly deeper. We had a moment once, and that was it. You don't think about it at all. I know it crosses your mind before you fall asleep. A shiver ran through me, causing me to take a small step back, but my feet remained glued to the floor. Elliot, this isn't right, I said, but my voice trembled. Elliot smiled slightly, but it wasn't an innocent smile. It made me think we had passed the point of deciding what was right. A long, long time ago, Darlene. Stop lying to yourself. Then he took a step forward, and another. He was so close now that I could his on mine. He raised his hand and gently let it glide over my cheek. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't, because deep down I knew he was right. And then Elliot's met mine. All the silence, all the tension, the answer to everything was hidden in that moment. The thoughts echoing in my head suddenly fell silent. All my doubts faded to whispers because I hadn't resisted Elliot. And the truth was, I never wanted to. My hands trembled, but I didn't stop. When I saw the determination in Elliot's eyes, I knew there was nothing left to hide. I swallowed, took a deep breath, and slowly slid the straps of my clothing from my shoulders. You're right, Elliot, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Let's not play this game any longer. The distance between us disappeared completely. I leaned back onto the bed. God, my heart was pounding in my chest, but going back was no longer an option. Elliot slowly leaned over me. He looked into my eyes for a moment and then smiled. Don't be afraid, he said. His voice was calm and reassuring. Everything is fine. I looked away. A shiver ran through me. Even though I couldn't admit it to myself, I knew how long I had waited for this moment. But still, I couldn't hold back the words. Elliot, I'm a little scared, I said. I conflicted because of a few big things. Elliot smiled and ignored what I said as if he liked it. Maybe it was because he was drunk. Elliot leaned gently towards my ear and said, George mustn't wake up. I knew what he meant, that there had to be silence. I didn't know how I could something so immense inside me, and I had to prevent myself from making a sound. Elliot looked at me and said something like, I know, Darlene, everything is wonderful, and you are too. What did he know? I think he guessed it and understood me. I couldn't help it, and I closed my eyes. I held the sheets tightly with my hands. My hands trembled and were tense. I covered my mouth with my hands, so I wouldn't make a sound. Elliot was so drunk that he didn't care. In fact, even this me deeply. The excitement of the event combined with everything else and the irresistibility of something so immense. Elliot was drunk, tired, and as he left my room, I said, Elliot, you're red and we need to hurry. Elliot said, okay, but he just kept going, more and more and more. I another wave and I stopped caring about anything anymore. I wasn't even myself anymore. I closed my eyes and said, "Whatever you want, Elliot, whatever you want." Elliot must have liked it because he let himself go. He completely let himself go, and it was too much. The heat inside me was too much. I quickly laid Elliot in his bed and covered him up. Then I locked his bedroom door. I wanted to take a quiet shower and completely relax. I had no idea what would happen after. What had just happened, I thought about it under the shower. But at the same time, I was nervous, uncomfortable, and yet by the time I got out, my mind was clearer. Strangely enough, I was actually calm. I couldn't even be angry at myself because I was relaxed as my mind. I dressed in silence, walked to my bed and went to sleep as if nothing had happened. But the truth is, this was just a moment of excitement, a haze of reckless desire. But nothing was ever that simple. And this wouldn't remain simple either. It didn't stop here. It couldn't. Bigger things happen, more intense things, and eventually George would discover everything. This story is not over yet. Make sure you follow and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Turn on notifications and leave a comment below so you're one step ahead of these stories. Your support means everything.